On page 32, there is a much longer passage. I do notice that there are no quotation marks on this one, which may or may not indicate that it's a secondary source. We can't always count on that, but it's one thing to notice. So it wants me to read the passage and then answer questions 1 through 5. In 1918, the flu spread and turned into a pandemic. 1/3 of the world's population, about 500 million people, caught the flu. World War I was one reason that the illness spread all over the world. The United States entered World War I in 1917. The Army built 32 training camps. Each camp had about 25,000 to 55,000 soldiers. The first signs of flu occurred in March 1918 at an Army camp in Kansas. In May, American soldiers began to go overseas to fight the war. The flu went with them. In the late summer, the flu flared up again. Almost 200,000 Americans died in October. Many cities closed public spaces such as theaters. They also urged people to walk and not take public transportation. In November, another wave of flu struck. The war had ended, and people gathered together to celebrate. The public did not know much about the pandemic. Because of the war, many countries did not offer reports on the flu. Only Spain let the press write about its cases of flu. Spain was not fighting in World War I. For that reason, the 1918 flu is sometimes referred to as the Spanish flu. It was not until 1920 that this flu pandemic ended. Question number 1. What happened in 1918? So I'm going to look back for 1918 and see what goes with that. The flu spread and turned into a pandemic. So my choices are World War I began, the flu pandemic started, World War I ended, or the flu pandemic was over. The flu pandemic began in 1918. Number 2, when did the United States begin to send soldiers overseas? So I'm going to look for United States soldiers overseas. I come back up here, and here I see there's the word soldiers and there's overseas. So I'm looking in this area. It says in May, American soldiers began to go overseas to fight the war. May when? I really would like to know the year. So I back up and there it is. In March 1918, the first signs of flu occurred. In May, American soldiers began to go overseas. So I think I like B on this one. May 1918. What event happened in October 1918? So I'm going to look for October 1918. And I'm just scanning. There's the word October. In late summer, flu flared up again. Americans died in October. Public places were closed. People were urged to walk and not take public transportation. So let's see which one of these fits. People began to celebrate when the war ended. The flu pandemic was finally over. The U.S. entered World War I, or about 200,000 Americans died with the flu. That's the one I'm looking for. That was a hard month for the United States. Number 4. How did fighting during World War I help spread the flu? So I'm interested in the actual fighting of World War I, and I'm interested in the spread of the flu. So let's look back here. Here we have U.S. entering World War I, so that would be fighting. The Army built camps. They were living in training camps. Lots of soldiers in each of those camps. So let's see what we have here. This is a little bit tougher. A, people gathered in public spaces to celebrate. Well, they would not have been celebrating fighting. They would celebrate at the end of the war. Everyone went to Spain because there was no fighting in the country. There was no fighting in Spain, that's true. They were not involved in the war, but people did not travel there. Soldiers lived close together, and they also traveled overseas. That's the one I'm looking for. Those close quarters allowed the flu to spread, and then when they traveled overseas, they were bringing the flu with them. And finally, no one wanted to go to theaters or take buses or trains. That would actually cut down on the spread of the flu. So number 4 is C. Why is 1920 an important date? Well, let's look back for that date and see what happened. In 1920, the flu pandemic ended. And that's going to be letter D. A says American soldiers were able to come home. People began to use the name Spanish flu. The flu pandemic began on that date, or the flu pandemic finally ended. Okay, I'm going to stop this video and then we'll pick up with the next section in the next video.